The world came back to me in pieces. First, the smell of mud and stagnant water. Then the throbbing in my ribs and the jeering laughter from the top of the creek bank. I pushed myself up onto my elbows, spitting grit from my mouth. Through the glare of the bonfire, I could see silhouettes. One of them I knew was Richie. His laughter was the loudest. He just sent me in a 40-year-old pickup truck over a 10-foot drop into Miller's Creek. On purpose. He thought it was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. As I lay there, cold water soaking through my jeans, I heard him yell down, "You all right down there, old man?" It wasn't a question of concern. It was a victory lap. I didn't answer. I just looked at the twisted wreck of the truck beside me. He thought this was the end of the story. He didn't know he'd just given me the perfect way to write the last chapter of ours.
My name is Jack Riley. I'm 61. For 40 years, I've owned a small two-bay auto repair shop on the edge of town. It's not fancy. The sign is faded. The coffee is usually burnt. But if your transmission is slipping or your engine is making a noise it shouldn't, people know to come see me. I deal in things that are tangible. Steel and oil and trust. You can't bullshit a timing belt, and you can't fake a proper weld. A thing is either fixed right or it's not. Richie Costello and I grew up together. We were inseparable as kids, tearing around town on our bikes, convinced we'd be buddies forever. But people grow, and sometimes they grow in different directions. I grew into my father's garage. Richie grew into a cheap suit and a smarmy grin. He became a salesman over at the big dealership in the next county. He was good at it, I'll give him that. He had a talent for making people feel like buying a car they couldn't afford was the smartest decision they'd ever make. Our friendship had been running on fumes for years. It was mostly held together by shared history and the fact that our town is too small to avoid anyone. He'd swing by the shop, lean against a customer's car, and brag about his latest commission or the new bass boat he was buying. It was all a performance. Richie needed an audience more than his truck needed gasoline. The real crack in our foundation happened about 5 years ago. He got himself into a jam with a loan shark over some bad gambling debts. He came to me one night, sweating and terrified. He needed $5,000, fast. I'm not a rich man, but I had it. I gave it to him, no questions asked. Just a handshake and his word that he'd pay me back in 6 months. 6 months turned into a year. A year turned into 5. He never paid it back. He'd slap me on the back of the town diner and say, "I haven't forgotten about you, Jack." But he had. The money wasn't the point anymore. It was the principle. It was a promise made and broken by a man who saw loyalty as a one-way street. I never brought it up. I just filed it away. It was a debt of character, and I knew sooner or later he'd have to pay it. The stage for my humiliation was the annual end-of-summer bonfire out at the old Henderson farm. It's a tradition. Half the town shows up. There's a keg, a mountain of hot dogs, and the ghost. The ghost is a 1978 Chevy C10 pickup truck. It's been sitting in Henderson's barn for decades. It runs barely. The brakes are suggestion. The steering has about a foot of play, and the body is more rust than paint. Every year, some of the younger, dumber guys will fire it up and take it for a spin around the big pasture. It's a stupid, dangerous tradition. I'd always stayed away from it. This year, Richie was in rare form. He'd just closed a big deal and was acting like he owned the world. He was surrounded by a new crowd, younger guys who were impressed by his flashy watch and his loud stories. He saw me standing by the fire, talking to an old friend. He swaggered over, the beer in his hand. "Jackie, my man, still playing with rusty bolts? He should get a real job, make some real money." He winked at the girl standing next to him. I just nodded. "Someone's got to fix the cars you sell, Richie." I got a laugh from a few people who knew him well. He didn't like that. His smile tightened. Just then, someone fired up the Ghost. It coughed to life with a roar and a cloud of blue smoke. Richie's eyes lit up. He saw his chance to be the star of the show again. "Hey," he yelled, "let's give the old man a real thrill ride." He grabbed my arm. "Come on, Jack, one ride for old time's sake. You ride in the back, I'll drive. We'll show these kids how it's done." It was a dare, plain and simple, delivered in front of 24 people. Saying no would make me look like a coward, like the old man he called me. Against my better judgment, fueled by a couple of beers and a flicker of the old foolish friendship, I agreed. I climbed into the rusty bed of the truck. The metal was cold and thin. Richie got behind the wheel, gun in the engine. We lurched forward, bouncing across the uneven pasture. People were cheering. I held onto the side, the wind whipping past me. For a moment, it was almost fun. But then I saw where he was heading. Straight for the edge of the property where the pasture ends in a steep, muddy drop-off to Miller's Creek. It was the one place everyone knew to avoid. "Richie, slow down," I yelled. He glanced at me in the rear-view mirror. He was smiling, a cold, deliberate smile. He wasn't gonna slow down. He was gonna put me on the edge, scare me, and then slam on the brakes to show everyone how daring he was. But he miscalculated. Or maybe he didn't. Instead of the brake, his foot hit the gas. The truck surged forward. I remember the feeling of weightlessness as the rear wheels went over the edge. The truck crashed down into the thick mud and water below with a sound like a giant crumple in a beer can. The impact threw me against the front of the bed, knocking the wind out of me. And then came the laughter from above. It washed over me colder than the creek water. That's when Richie yelled down his fake question. He followed it up with a threat, his voice low enough that only I would hear it if I was closer. "Remember that $5,000, Jack? You tell anyone this wasn't an accident, and I'll tell the whole town you've been harassing me for money I already paid back. Who do you think'll believe?" He had me, humiliated, injured, and now blackmailed by the man I once called my best friend.
I managed to climb out of that creek bed, ignoring Richie and his cronies. I walked the 2 miles home in my wet clothes, every step fueling a cold, hard rage. He hadn't just hurt me. He'd used our entire history as a weapon. He'd counted on me being the quiet, decent guy who would just swallow his pride and let it go. And he was right. I wasn't going to get into a shouting match or a fist fight. I was past that. But I wasn't going to let it go. I spent the next day in my garage, the pain in my ribs a constant reminder. I was trying to work, but my mind was elsewhere. I was looking for a tool, a way to fix this. Not with my hands, but with my head. Direct confrontation was out. He'd just lie his way out of it. I needed a different kind of tool. A lever. Something to pry his ego loose from its foundation. That's when I saw it, tacked to the greasy corkboard by the phone. A flyer for the County Fair Demolition Derby. It was an annual event, the highlight of the fair for a certain crowd. It was loud, dumb, and violent. And it was Richie's favorite stage. Every year he'd enter a souped-up derby truck, a heavily modified Ford Bronco he'd painted black with red flames. He loved it. He'd brag for weeks beforehand about how he was going to dominate. Nobody had the guts to take him on. He usually won, too, mostly by being more reckless than anyone else.
His pride and his identity were welded to that truck. And I knew his truck. He'd brought it to my shop a couple of years back after a particularly rough derby. I'd done some frame straightening work on it. I knew its weak spots. I knew the shoddy patch job he'd done himself on the front passenger side A-arm mount. He'd used cheap metal and a MIG welder he didn't know how to use properly. From the outside, it looked fine, but I knew it was brittle. A plan began to form in my mind, intricate and precise as a gearbox schematic. I wasn't going to try and outmuscle Richie. I was going to outthink him. I was going to use his own aggression, his own pride, his own shoddy workmanship against him. I picked up the phone and called my buddy Tom, who runs the local junkyard. I said, "Tom, it's Jack. Tell me you still have that old Lincoln Town car sitting in the back lot. The big one, the one that looks like a land yacht." Tom chuckled. "The silver one? The tank? Yeah, it's still here. Why? You planning on driving the Mary to a dinner party?" "No," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. "I'm planning on going to the Demolition Derby." For the next 2 weeks, I lived in my garage after hours. The Lincoln was perfect. It was ugly, but it was built like a fortress. A full-frame, heavy-gauge steel. They don't make them like that anymore. I didn't care about making it fast. I cared about making it smart. I welded steel plates behind the driver's door and reinforced the frame around the engine compartment. The key, though, was the rear axle and bumper. I used heavy-duty truck leaf springs to reinforce the whole back end, turning it into a solid wall of steel. From the outside, the car still looked like a beat-up piece of junk you'd find abandoned on the side of the road. I didn't even wash it. It was my Trojan horse. The night of the Derby was hot and humid. The air was thick with the smell of popcorn and diesel fumes. The grandstands were packed. I saw Richie strutting around the pit area, slapping backs and pointing at his big black Bronco. He saw me standing next to my pathetic-looking Lincoln and laughed out loud. "Jesus, Jack, what is that thing? Did you pull it out of the creek with the ghost?" he shouted so his friends could hear. "You're gonna last about 30 seconds out there." "We'll see, Richie," I said, my voice calm. The Derby started with a roar of engines and the crunch of metal. I did exactly what Richie expected me to do. I was defensive. I stayed on the outside of the track, avoiding contact and letting the more aggressive drivers take each other out. A couple of cars gave me glancing blows, but the old Lincoln just shrugged them off. The crowd started booing me a little. The announcer called me Gentleman Jack, the guy who was too scared to fight. I could see Richie across the muddy arena. He was a shark, ramming and disabling smaller cars one by one. After about 10 minutes, there were only 4 of us left, and he finally turned his attention to me. His truck roared as he came straight for my driver's door. This was it. But I wasn't his target. I was his target. I knew he'd come for the driver's door. It's the classic kill shot. I also knew he was overconfident. As he barreled toward me, I didn't speed up. I hit the brakes hard. My car stopped a good 10 feet short of where he expected it to be. He tried to correct his course, but it was too late. Instead of hitting my door, the front passenger side wheel of his Bronco slammed directly into my massively reinforced rear bumper. The sound was not the loud crash everyone expected. It was a sickening metallic thunk, a crack. Richie's truck ground to a halt. The impact had done exactly what I knew it would. It had shattered his shoddy weld. The A-arm mount collapsed, and his front wheel buckled inward, bent at a grotesque angle. His prized monster truck was crippled. He tried to reverse, but the wheel just scraped uselessly against the frame. He was stuck. The crowd went quiet for a second, confused. Then, a few people started to laugh. The announcer, seeing Richie's predicament, got on the microphone. "Well, folks, it looks like the big bad Bronco just got outsmarted by a land yacht. Looks like his front wheel wants to go home early." The laughter grew. Richie threw his helmet against his dashboard in a fury. He was still revving his engine, as if pure anger could fix his broken truck. It was no use. He was a sitting duck. I put the Lincoln in drive. I didn't hit him again. That wasn't the point. I drove a slow, deliberate lap around the arena, right past his disabled truck. I didn't look at him. I just kept my eyes forward, my hands steady on the wheel. I gave a small nod to the flagman and drove my beat-up, victorious car off the track and into the pits. I'd won, not by being stronger, but by knowing my opponent's weakness. The prize money didn't matter. I heard later that Richie had to have his truck towed out of the arena, a final public shame. He lost more than a derby that night. He lost his reputation. The story of how old Jack Riley, the quiet mechanic, used a junkyard car to outwit the town hotshot spread like wildfire. People didn't see him as a tough guy anymore. They saw him as a fool who got beaten at his own game. He never came by the shop again. He didn't have to. The debt was paid. Not the $5,000. The other one. The one that mattered.
I'm sitting here in my garage now. It's quiet. There's a '65 Mustang on the lift that needs a new clutch. It's honest work. It's real. I think about revenge. It's not a hot, fiery thing like they show in the movies. It's not about explosions and confrontation. Real revenge, satisfying revenge, it's cold and patient. It's a tool, like a torque wrench. You apply steady, calculated pressure to a specific point, and eventually, the thing that seems impossibly stuck comes loose. Richie was a man built out of cheap parts and bad welds. He looked impressive on the surface, all noise and flashy paint, but he had no integrity in his frame. He thought the world worked on intimidation and loud noises. He forgot that the quiet guys, the ones who spend their lives figuring out how things really work, are the ones who know where the weak spots are. I didn't destroy him. I just created a situation where his own flaws would destroy his own pride. He was the architect of his own downfall. I just drew the blueprint. There's a certain peace in that, a sense of balance restored. It's the same feeling I get when an engine that was running rough finally purrs to life, every cylinder firing in perfect harmony. It's the feeling of something broken being made right again.
Like and subscribe.